Dan Delmar in for Aaron today. Now, the U.S. dollar, the pros and cons of adopting the U.S. dollar. And I wanted to chat hypothetically with my friend Vincent Geloso. He's an assistant professor of economics at George Mason University, a Quebecer working in the States. Hey, Vincent, how are you?
Good day. How are you doing? Happy holidays.
Excellent. Happy holidays to you as well. So Kevin O'Leary coming up in about a half hour. What was your initial reaction to how he's been going viral over the past 24 hours for his comments on Fox?
Well, it's so as a Canadian living in the U.S., it's the recurrent joke that a lot of Americans make is that Canada is the 51st state. So that's a recurrent joke that Americans make. But if you think about currency, Canada and the United States are so integrated with respect to trade, but also with respect to capital market, that it doesn't really make a big of a difference whether or not Canada would adopt the U.S. dollar or if it keeps the Canadian dollar. These two markets are so well integrated that there's no particular advantage or disadvantages of adopting the U.S. dollar. There's some specific disadvantages for adopting the U.S. dollar a bit more than it is to keep the Canadian dollar.
Interesting. So you're not going to take a stance on this? You think the outcome would be roughly neutral?
I honestly think the reason the outcome would be neutral is because Canada is so well integrated with the United States. The reason why it would be detrimental to Canada is the loss of monetary autonomy. So Canada, because it has its own currency, has the ability to conduct monetary policy, which means that if there is some variation in business cycle, it can do something to offset this. So if the shock, and when I say business cycle, you can think of a recession, you can think of something happening from the outside or something happening to the financial sector. If it's shared with the U.S., it doesn't really matter that we would have the U.S. dollar. But if it's only Canada specific, then having the U.S. dollar would be a problem. So losing monetary policy would be a downside. Now, the reason why I say that there's neutral is if you look at the countries that have, in quote-unquote, dollarized, generally when countries dollarize, it's because people don't trust their central bank. So they don't trust the government to actually keep the central bank autonomous, to make it independent from the political sphere. And by importing dollarization, so using the U.S. dollar as a legal tender currency, remove the arbitrary power of the government to inflate away public debt. Canada doesn't really have that problem. As much as we may dislike as Canadian, the Canadian government, Canada doesn't fit that bill of a country that people would consider a good candidate for dollarization. So overall, not much advantages, more disadvantages. So on net, if it's closer to neutral, probably a negative closer to neutral would be my summary of the entire thing.
Okay, let me throw this hypothetical by you. Economist Vincent Geloso joins us. So let's just say, and I've argued this with callers actually today, that I do think Canada can recover. I generally do think that we can recover from the enormous debt and wasteful spending of the past few years, and I think we can do that in a few years. But let's just say hypothetically that we don't, and let's just say that we get mired in liberal and conservative big governments that pile on the debt and are very wasteful, and maybe we go down a road that's not dissimilar to Argentina. In that situation, if our economy and our dollar vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar continues to sag, would you look at Argentina as an example of maybe in that kind of case, maybe it does make sense to adopt the U.S. dollar?
So this is a very sad hypothetical that you're proposing to me. To go down to Argentina-like level means that we'd have to go from a country that has less than, according to like absolute poverty measures, of less than 3% to in excess of 50.
Wow.
Let's hope that hypothetical never happens. But I would say that the reason why you would want to do this is very much that no one trusts the government to preserve the independence of the central bank. If that was the case, I would change my opinion. But that hypothetical is not anywhere close to happening. In fact, if anything, Canada's on a slightly more sustainable fiscal path than the United States are. Canada can because provincial governments can do reform. There's a lot of spending that happens in the provincial government that are politically touchable. There are ways of bringing about fiscal discipline. The United States has the three horsemen of the apocalypse, if you want to call it like that, of political apocalypse that it cannot touch. And that's one, defense. No party will touch defense spending. And the other two are Social Security and Medicare. These three together account for most of the federal government spending and is entirely untouchable politically, which is what is making the U.S. fiscal path much harder to sustain, is no one wants to touch these, and that leaves only like crumbs on the plate that are up to debate. So I think your hypothetical is, if we reach that hypothetical, yes, dollarization would be a good idea, but that's really like in a horrible, horrible world. And given the fiscal path of the United States, I wouldn't be really excited about that case at that point in time.
Okay, fair. Let's hopefully not go there. But how about one last argument that we'll deal with Kevin O'Leary when he comes on after 4 o'clock, and that is a unified economic zone, not unlike the European Union, which would of course imply doing a lot of free trade, getting rid of a lot of those barriers, and crucially having free trade between Canadian provinces. If we could construct that kind of unified economic zone, would that be a positive project?
So, as an economist, I tend to think of borders between goods and services as being largely artificial. There is nothing preventing us as Canadians from getting this without joining a political union. Canada tomorrow morning could have free trade with the United States by just saying we are removing all tariffs and quotas. It could do this tomorrow morning. There is nothing preventing us from allowing the cheapest good available out there to come freely into Canada. There's nothing preventing us. There is also nothing preventing provinces from doing this. So I would claim that it's not necessary to have some form of political union to have free trade. In fact, the history of certain countries, like, for example, the United Kingdom, is a history of unilateral liberalization. And if you look since, say, the 1950s, and you look at the bulk of tariff restrictions, trade barrier reductions, so all the efforts towards trade liberalization in the world, 75% of it happened by countries doing it on their own, rather than doing it through treaties or stuff like this. So there's nothing preventing us. It's not exceptional when a country liberalizes unilaterally. So we could do it without having political union. We should start talking about free trade as a positive thing, and to give tush-tush to politicians who engage in protectionist talk.
I'm for supply management, by the way. I've decided on my new position. I'm for it, but only for maple syrup.
Well, I didn't expect to talk about supply management, but supply management is a horrible set of policy.
We won't go there. That's a whole other conversation. Real quick, Vincent, in terms of the rhetoric among the right wing in the States, certainly you come into contact with a lot of Trumpists, maybe even in academia. When they bring up the 51st state thing, do you shut that down? Do you joke around? What's your reaction like when that comes up in conversation?
It's a bipartisan joke to make fun of Canada as the 51st state. It's a recurrent thing. I've lived in the United States in and out for the last 20 years, so I'm very familiar with Americans. I've heard Democrats make the joke. I've heard Republicans make the joke. You even have TV shows where the main character says, "Why do we let you be a country?" Come out as a joke on How I Met Your Mother and stuff like that. It's a very common joke. It honestly doesn't mean much. So my reaction is, okay, this is just a usual jingoist joke that you can shrug off as being largely inconsequential bluster.
Vincent Geloso, Quebecer in D.C., Assistant Professor of Economics at George Mason University. Thanks very much, Vincent. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays as well.